So we already knew that they had done a decent amount of damage to the bomber fleet. We didn't know for sure that the radar aircraft had been damaged, but I had been told by reliable sources who had been told by even more reliable sources that the radar aircraft had been, at the very least, heavily damaged. And the Russians denied that radar aircraft had been damaged or destroyed. Some of them said that they were even like decoys or stuff. Others said they weren't hit at all. And there was just a bunch of denials and denials and denials for the amount of damage done. They said, you know, maybe a few bombers got destroyed, but nothing militarily significant. Now, the Ukrainians, on the other hand, of course, said that they destroyed 41 aircraft. 41 aircraft, destroyed or damaged 41 aircraft. Now, we didn't know what was more likely to be believed. I know the Financial Times released a report saying that they could confirm 11 to 12 destroyed aircraft through radar, not through radar, through satellite photographs from Maxar and other satellite companies, and from maybe some like cell phone footage from X, Y, or Z soldier on the ground filming the whole drone operation themselves. But we didn't have enough footage to confirm a lot more of the damage, especially when it comes to the A-50 radar aircraft, where there had been no photos published, there had been no video published, but I had been told stuff behind closed doors that, you know, would, and I had seen stuff behind closed doors that would indicate to me that, you know, okay, maybe something had happened, and it's pretty clear that that looks like an A-50, you know. But when it comes to what was being publicly published, we're talking about like a couple bombers combined with more, leading to 11 or 12 from satellite photos. Now, the Ukrainians are doubling down on their claim that they destroyed or damaged 41 bomber aircraft out of Russia's 120 bomber aircraft, which would be talking about the destruction of 30%. 30% of Russia's bomber fleet, a very significant amount. They've now posted more footage to back up that claim. And since this footage has been published, when looking at Russian Telegram channels, it's very fascinating because at first they started going through the 5 stages of grief, you know, starting with denial, etc., and then starting to go through those stages. But they had accepted that, you know, while this is not good and this is bad, it's not nearly as bad as the Ukrainians say. Now, since this footage has been published, it's like they have to go through the entire 5 stages of griefs again, because they're realizing that, oh, it's actually a lot closer to as bad as the Ukrainians said. Now, this footage does not show 41 damaged or destroyed aircraft, but it shows half of that. And of course, everything we see here is not necessarily all of the footage, but I think that this is probably, at this point, a majority of it, a majority of the damage. While there might be a few other vehicles or aircraft damaged that the Ukrainians have, you know, yet to release footage of because of security protocol or reasons, or they simply were not able to get the footage of it, it was corrupted or some other means. What we do have here is evidence of half of that number, which is a lot more than the 20, 30-second clips we were getting originally. And so I wanted to show you this, and to show you guys that this isn't propaganda, even though the footage, I think, kind of speaks for itself. I am going to, as this plays, because it has music that's probably copyrighted, I am going to read you geo-confirmed, which is actually the same OSCENT group that actually identified Russian propaganda video of us and our aid mission in Kherson being bombed that I was filming back when my friend John Jones get hit in the stomach by that shrapnel during that aid mission to stop all those animals from drowning in the flooding. So it's the same group. They're very credible. I'm going to read off of their list for destroyed and damaged aircraft because it's long. It is very detailed, and if you're curious about the methodology, I think the methodology makes sense. The way they did it is they identified the different planes, because obviously a lot of Tu-95s got destroyed, a lot of Tu-22s got destroyed, you know, some A-50s got at least damaged. If you're curious about what these different models look like, here you go. Here's a Tupolev Tu-22. Here's a Tupolev Tu-95. Here's an A-50 early warning and control aircraft, which is extremely rare. extremely valuable, and Russia cannot build many of, and they are in the single digit numbers for how many of these operational aircraft they still have. So any of these even getting damaged when the replacement parts are so expensive is extremely damaging to the Russian armed forces. And Tupolev Tu-160. So that's what they look like for anybody curious. Now this 10 to 12, according to independent estimates here, this is actually old, because this footage shows it is actually more than double this number of 10 to 12. And it's actually fills up a lot more of this pink, which the Ukrainians claim. Not all the way to 40, we don't have that much footage, but more than halfway to that claim. Let me show you guys this footage in all of its explodey detail. And my gosh, there is a lot of footage. That's, I guess, when I first saw this footage, I just kind of sat there in befuddlement at the amount of expensive Russian bomber aircraft that they've lost. So let me read you off this list. And I'm sorry if it seems detailed and like overburdened, but I just want to prove without a shadow of the doubt that the Russians got their nose bloodied. My goodness. So it's plain. Now, let me read you this. Now, this is also time-stamped for the times the aircraft shows. And by the way, one of the ways they identified it is not only geolocating it, but they counted the different amount of tires on the aircraft, because the Russians thought that putting car tires on their tens of million dollar aircraft was gonna like stop a drone attack by confusing the AI or something. And I gotta say, I'm unconvinced. Anyway, let me start reading these off to you, okay? Olena Air Base, this is what this starts at. This is Olena Air Base. At the 6-second mark, a Tu-95 is destroyed. At the 11-second mark, a Tu-95, another one. The fourth one, I believe, it's Tu-95-4. At the 12-second mark, a Tu-95 destroyed. At the 17-second mark, a Tu-95 destroyed. At the 21-second mark, a Tu-95 destroyed. At the 26-second mark, Tu-95, 32, Tu-95, 38, Tu-95, 44, Tu-95, 50, Tu-95, 55, Tu-95. 1 minute and 1 second, Tu-22. 1 minute and 10 seconds, Tu-22. 1 minute 19, Tu-22. 1 minute 26, AN-12. Then you move on to Ivano Air Base. This is where two A-50s were attacked at both the 1 minute 34-second point. It was attacked and then moved. And then at the 2 minute point where an A-50 was attacked. Now, whether or not these were destroyed is totally up for interpretation. We don't have evidence.
Are we covering the upscaled assault in the Sumy region today as well?
Maybe.
It looks dire on the maps. I'm curious what you've heard on the ground.
I haven't heard anything because I haven't been talking to anybody on the ground in Sumy. We might talk about it later. Then we have the air base in Duglieville. Sorry about the pronunciation, but a Tu-95 at the 2 minute and 5 second mark attacked. 2 minute 14 seconds. There's that same Tu-22. 2 minutes and 20 seconds, Tu-22 attacked. 2 minutes and 25 seconds, Tu-22 attacked. Then you go to the Bilana Air Base. This one, at 2 minutes and 36 seconds, you have a Tu-22 destroyed. At 2 minutes and 43 seconds, there's a Tu-22 as well. They believe it is the same one that was destroyed before, based on the tires on top of that plane. Then at 2 minutes 49 seconds, a Tu-22 destroyed. 3 minutes and 2 seconds, a Tu-22 attacked. At 3 minutes and 3 seconds, my goodness, Tu-22 attacked. 3 minutes and 9 seconds, Tu-22 destroyed. Then it's that same Tu-22 at 3 minutes and 21. 3:22, Tu-22 attacked. 3:29, Tu-22, it's I believe the second one for before that was destroyed. 3:35, Tu-22 attacked. 3:40, Tu-22 destroyed. 3:52, UNC, they say this could be double, but they don't know for sure. 3:59, Tu-95 destroyed. 4 minutes and 5 seconds, another Tu-95 destroyed. Then they go and show off those Tu-95s at 4:16 and 4:20. Then you get the God, my gosh. T-425 to another T-95 that was destroyed. Then you get to 428. Tu-95 attacked, then the plane was gone, meaning that it was damaged, but maybe they're moving it and such like that. 435 Tu-22, same one earlier, that was damaged or destroyed. No, actually destroyed, not damaged. So when you count up all of this together, the total number we have is 12 destroyed, 11 attacked with damage unclear, and 1 UNK, which could be doubled. So we're talking about 23 to 25 damaged and destroyed aircraft, which is more than half of what the Ukrainian SBU originally claimed in this attack, to give you an idea of the scale of this. And so again, the Russians went through 2 waves of grief here. They went through 2 waves of grief. They went through the first wave of grief when they found out that the Ukrainians could pull off something like this and the government had failed in protecting their major air bases. And they went through the second wave of grief when they found out that the majority of the damaged and destroyed aircraft that the Ukrainians had claimed, they have video evidence for. And that's just what we're saying they have video evidence for. Of course, the Ukrainians are still claiming, if you look at this video, which the SBU, which is Ukrainian intelligence, posted, and you translate this, it says that they did, take out 41, well, not take out, but at least hit 41 Russian strategic aviation military aircraft, basically strategic bombers and radar aircraft that are used by the Russians to attack Ukraine. So they're still claiming that there is more that they're not showing us, or they don't have video of, that they hit, but they're not showing that video evidence of. I imagine that this is probably the most explosive footage that we have. And maybe there is other stuff where maybe it like slightly clipped a wing and it's like less damage and it's not really worth it, or one was hit and it didn't really do any substantial damage. Who knows? But the point is, the majority of the damage that the Ukrainians claimed from their official government sources ended up being accurate. And the Russian claims that this damage was actually not that big, that, maybe their tires had actually worked in like confusing AI or making one of the drones like bounce off or whatever, that had not succeeded. And this is actually a very substantial amount of damage to the Russian armed forces. And I do want to just point to you guys, now this is 10 to 12. That's what they showed for independent estimates. Now, since then, this has grown obviously to like 23, 24, 25. So we're doubling that number. But if we were to just take what we see and we know, we're talking about 15% of the Russian bomber fleet being taken out in roughly 2 hours, which I think is pretty good work rate for Ukrainian intelligence. Mind you, this is just what we could see. The number very well could be higher. Again, it very well could be higher. So now that we know that this is much worse than the Russians than they originally thought, and it's probably much worse than the Russians than what I thought, because I was like, okay, if it's 40 that the Ukrainians are claiming, maybe it's like 1/5 of that or 1/4 of that. No, it looks like the majority of it ended up being completely true, which they're now providing evidence of. There seems to be this tendency where the Ukrainians kind of wait for the Russians to come out with their statements.
Burns is an
immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man, where they kind of wait for the Russians to come out with their statements about what happened, and then they publish the footage of it, disproving it or showing that, hey, here's actually what happened, etc. And I have to throw out there, look, the Tu-95s, destroying those, damaging those, extremely useful since they're being used to bomb Ukraine. And I do want to throw out, for everybody that sees this as a massive escalation and why would you target this option of the nuclear triad of the Russian armed forces, you can actually see from the drone footage, we got some freeze frames here, that these bombers, as they were being taken out by Ukrainian drones, were actively loaded with missiles that were presumably about to go en route to Ukraine, fire these missiles at their cities. So these are bombers that the Russians were actively preparing to attack Ukraine with, that Ukraine attacked. These are not bombers that were being held back just for the nuclear triad. These are not bombers that are just sitting on the shelf collecting dust that Russia keeps in its reserves. These are not bombers that the Russian armed forces, were just like taking out for a military parade or some type of museum sideshow. These are weapons of war that they were using for that purpose, not just the delivery of atomic weapons, but the delivery of missiles that have slammed into Ukrainian cities for over 3 years before the Ukrainians carried out Operation Spiderweb to target these bombers. These bombers have been used for the killing of countless Ukrainian soldiers, civilian infrastructure, and military infrastructure. By all the laws of war and by the authority of the Ukrainian presidency, the government had the right to engage in this operation. And the only reason I even bring that up is I saw like the PBD podcast host, Patrick Bet-David. He was like, who gave Ukraine the right to do this? I don't know, self-defense. I thought that was a conservative value. And here's not, it wasn't just one plane that was loaded up, by the way. Look, it's multiple planes that were loaded up. You can see it. You can see they were getting ready to attack Ukraine with these. What do you expect Ukraine to do? And this is the question that I have to throw at people like, like Patrick Bet-David, or all the weird Vet Bro podcasts that are coming out, or like Jack Posobiec, or what is that name? Not Scott Hawthorne. What is his name? I forget his name. I quote tweeted him on Twitter. I forget his name. I'll bring him up quickly so I remember it. Where is he? Tim Pool, The Persistence. Yeah, Scott Pressler. They're coming out with messages like this. It's all very clear to me. Neither Zelenskyy nor the Democrats want peace. Both of them are just biding their time in the hopes that Republicans lose the House in 2026. Then Democrats will be in control of the budget, and Ukraine continues to get its blank check for war. All a game. Dude. Do you have to be so boring and predictable? Can you not have an original opinion with original thoughts and like be your own person and say something like, oh, wait, you know what? Maybe a war in Eastern Europe that has hundreds upon hundreds of history behind it, well before the Democrats and the Republicans were even a thing, might actually not be all about you. It might not actually be all about your partisan hackery and your dumb wedge issues. It might be that the Ukrainians don't want war. Ooh, they're not the ones who started it. They simply want to take out the bombers that are bombing their cities. This makes me question. I mean, there was another one from Tim Pool that really set me for a loop. Let me see if I can go back up here and show you it quickly. Here it is. How Arsler. Zelenskyy wants to negotiate but keep secrets that undermine the U.S. position. This is about the Ukrainians not telling the Russians that they were going to, the Russians, Freudian slip, not telling Trump that they were going to engage in this operation in advance because of operational secrecy. And with this type of operation, any leak would immediately destroy it. And his thing, you want secrets. You want to undermine the U.S. position. I really wonder if Tim Pool, while American cities were getting bombed and missiles were slamming into apartment homes, hospitals, nursing homes, and not just adult hospitals, children's hospitals. I remember the children's hospital. I remember hearing the missile go over my apartment that hit that children's hospital, right? If that was happening in, say, Baltimore, Dallas, Los Angeles, San Fran, Cincinnati, right? If it was happening in any of these locations, would his position be, well, we could take out some of the bombers doing this and make China or whatever power is doing this rethink them doing that, or we can wait for the tiny hope that they'll develop a conscience in the next 24 hours and stop bombing us, and negotiations that have shown no sign of success so far are going to magically succeed. These people live in La La Land. The war is nothing more than a partisan issue for them. The lives of these people are not being treated with seriousness. And it's all just like, Lamau, look how based and edgy I am. Oh, it's all retarded. Ha 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 ha. It's nothing to them. This war is nothing to them. I mean, this is the same Tim Pool that said Ukraine is the biggest threat to the entire world's security, that Ukraine is the enemy of the world. He talks about Ukraine as if it's Beelzebub incarnate. Anyway, after all of this processed and went through the system, Zelenskyy awarded the people involved. You don't get to see their faces because I imagine that, if people knew who they were, they would immediately become some of the most wanted people by Russian assassins instantly. But we also got some reaction from Vladimir Putin, and we're going to start with that reaction from Vladimir Putin and the Russians. Putin reacted to Ukraine's offer of a summit with Zelenskyy, saying like, "Hey, we want a summit with Zelenskyy, and we want an immediate ceasefire, just like Donald Trump requested. He requested that we have an immediate unilateral 30-day ceasefire." He requested that you meet with the Ukrainian president. Trump keeps saying that we're on the pathway to a meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin. The Chinese even say that, a meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin is kind of necessary to, end the war, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Putin has reacted to this request from the Ukrainians for a summit to end the war and have an immediate ceasefire, saying no, and saying who has negotiations with terrorists. Mind you, that the targets that were struck were military air bases, that there was not a single military or civilian casualty from these strikes that we're aware of outside of the man who went into the back of the truck that had all the explosives, and then the truck exploded. And if there's any tip I can give anyone, whether you're on either side of this war, is if you see something and you don't know what it is, don't pick it up, shake it around, and like, ooh, is this an explosive? I would advise you not to do that. That's unwise, okay? If you see something, say something. You ever see that in the train? Well, when they talk about somebody leaving a bag and it might be a bomb reported to the authorities, they don't tell you to take a baseball bat and start fucking whacking it, okay? So that would be my advice to everybody at home, is not to play whack-a-mole with what could be a bomb, okay? Well, he says don't negotiate with terrorists. Who has negotiations with terrorists? Now, we've been doing this for 140 days. Trump said before he was inaugurated, then 24 hours, then 100 days. Every single goalpost he's put has been moved or has fallen down. The ceasefires he's put forward have either been rejected or accepted and then violated. At this point, definitely with this type of rhetoric coming from the Kremlin, it should be pretty obvious to everyone that there is no foreseeable ceasefire peace deal in the future. The Russians have showed zero interest, and all they have done since day one of Trump being inaugurated for the second term is drag on the negotiation process. Drag it on, drag it on, drag it on. Trump has said 4 times that Vladimir Putin, he will know if he wants peace in 2 weeks. He said it in April. He said it at the start of May. He said it later into May. He said it to the Swedish press. He keeps saying it again and again and again. And by the end of this week, that 2-week timer that Trump put forward is going to be up again. And by the end of this week, will he truly know that Putin isn't ready for peace? Well, maybe. You didn't expect that response, did you? I didn't either. But first, before we get to that, I wanted to show you the response from the average Russian airman. This is what is being written on Russian bombs that are being thrown at Ukrainian locations across the country. This is for the Tu-22. This is Russian aircraft armors. These are people who equip the aircraft with bombs and such. This is them memorializing destroyed military equipment. Now, I want to throw something at you guys. When I'm with Ukrainian soldiers, and I don't know if this comes off as partisan, but I don't know how to put this out. When I was with the mortar team on the border in Sumy, they said for Dnipro. And this was in response to a bombing of, a hospital that injured some young children and killed people. When I'm with other teams, they'll like sign shells with the names of soldiers that have fallen. Or maybe, and this happens too, it's part of like the Sign My Shell program, and people are like selling side shells with certain messages so somebody can say happy birthday or something to a signed shell because they're finding every single way they can to fundraise. Every single way they can. But the majority of these the Tu-22, the Tu-95, like for Russian aviation, that's what these says. The majority of these have nothing to do with it. The only one that has to do with this is this one, which references a train in Bryansk that derailed, that the Russian says was blown up by the Ukrainians, which led to the death of civilians. This is the only one that I've seen of the recent ones that have been posted that have been related to any Russian civilian deaths. And this is happening at the same time that the Russians are amassing soldiers on the northern border of Ukraine that many people suspect is part of a preparation for large-scale offensives to take more territory in the Sumy region, attack towards, these different border towns, and try to capture more territory, as Vladimir Putin talks about developing a quote-unquote buffer zone on the border with Ukraine. Now, let's talk about the American response, because as this is going on, the momentum for a sanctions package on the Hill is growing, and I'm saying this seriously. Richard Blumenthal is saying this, and of course he's a Democratic senator, so you can take his word or you cannot take his word, but I'm hearing for others that there's a hunger for action, not only within the Democratic Party, that will almost all certainly vote in favor of sanctions packages against the Russians, from the most progressive members, including AOC, Ilhan Omar, all the way to like Tom Suzy from New York, right? You're going to get the full spectrum of votes behind this, both in the House and in the Senate. But within the Republican Party, we're also starting to feel some momentum. We're also starting to feel the basic truth that, if in another 60 days this is all going on and it's been 200 days and we've seen no progress and the Russians are engaging in the large-scale summer offensives that everyone expects, well, then will this not just be a show of Trump's failure on foreign policy? Will this not just make the president look weak after he's been trying to push for peace for over 200 days and have shown strength when dealing with the Iranians, using the Israelis like an attack dog? Like, hey, if you don't deal with me, you're going to have to deal with them. But when he goes to the Russians, the way he talks about them is, let's just say, non-critical in most times of the day, or is usually padded out with critiques of the Ukrainians with no new reason to apply pressure. No, if you do this, we will do X. And the times that they have done that, they've ultimately always chickened out, like with the 30-day ceasefire or sanctions that immediately were rolled back afterwards. Let's listen to Blumenthal talk about the growing momentum on the Hill for a sanctions package. Let me just tell you, if you're within the Republican Party, you do not want to have to tell all your constituents or look down the war worsening and worsening down the road, and this ultimately being blamed on you when you always could have put forward a sanction package. Mike Johnson could put a sanction package on the floor tomorrow. He could be behind a sanction package tomorrow if he wanted. It's just that so far, they've been letting Trump take the lead on this.
Off a trip to Ukraine to meet with President Zelenskyy, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. Senator, thanks for coming in. You met with Zelenskyy on Friday, I believe. This was your 7th trip to Ukraine. What did you see this time that you hadn't before?
What I saw first and foremost was the maps and some of the intelligence that indicate that Ukraine, far from losing this war, actually can win it. The maps and intelligence are going to be on display in just a little while here at the Capitol, with 2 of President Zelensky's top security officials coming to brief all of the Senate. All senators have been invited by Senator Graham and myself to hear and see what we did just last week, indicating the audacious and bold, brilliant move in attacking the Russian airfields was just one card that Zelenskyy and Ukraine have to play. And the second point, which is very important, is that Putin has begun a massive invasion, really a re-invasion or summer offensive. And so the sanctions bill is all the more critical right now. That's why we hope to move forward with these scorching levies and sanctions that, in effect, would put Ukraine, the economy of Russia, on an economic island, in effect stop the kind of aid that China has been providing that fuel the Russian war machine. And so this sanctions bill is very important at this moment in history.
So to be clear, what Trump threatened on the campaign trail was secondary sanctions. There could be nothing more devastating when it comes to a sanction package against the Russians than secondary sanctions. What secondary sanctions are is saying that not only are we going to sanction the Russians, if you do business with the Russians, we're going to sanction you like you are the Russians. Meaning that if you're a Chinese company, you've got to decide whether or not you're doing business in Russia, which has a smaller GDP than California, or the entirety of the United States, which has the largest GDP of any country in the world and has a gigantic market of consumers. And that's not just to say it's going to be the United States, because I would not be surprised if the United States takes a big stance on increasing sanctions on Russia. It's not like the Europeans are going to be like, oh, okay, well, now America's taking the lead again. They're going to try to coordinate with some new sanctions on their side as well. And I do know that they are preparing a new sanctions package for the end of June. I believe it's either going to be the 18th or the 17th sanctions package that the EU has passed. But secondary sanctions would be devastating for anybody that wants to import Russian raw materials or wants to import any Russian domestically produced Russian goods. But what's going to be most important is how it could be devastating for Russian energy exportation, because China and India have benefited from the war due to the fact that Russia is no longer selling much energy to Europe. Still, Orban's Hungary, Slovakia, there's some LNG, there's some other stuff going to other countries, but it's largely moving away. And China and India, knowing that Russia's in this economically restrained position, have been able to get Russian crude oil exports and energy exports at a massive discount. Right? Say right now, international oil prices are about $65 per barrel. That means the Chinese would be buying Russian oil at, say, $50 per barrel, right? Which is about the limit of what the Russian economy can take. So if you punish China or punish India for the importation of this type of energy, are they going to choose to continue to take that advantage of those, cheaper energy imports? Or are they going to say doing business with the entirety of the United States and Europe is important enough that we don't need that discount? We can get our fuel somewhere else. And mind you, at the same time, Donald Trump is engaging in negotiations with the Iranians. And if this does lead to a new Iran deal that allows energy to be exported from Iran into Europe, that could also further decrease energy prices, which would hurt the Russians, who would then be selling oil per barrel, selling their energy export at a lower and lower price. So the possibility of the damage a sanctions package like this could do is quite significant. Now, of course, I'm not saying that the end-all be-all is a sanctions package. It's not like you implement sanctions, the Russian economy immediately collapses, and then, the flag of, the blue and white Russian flag raises over the Kremlin. But it certainly is a pressure. And if you combine something like this with a sizable weapon sale of air defense systems or a constant stream of 155 artillery shells that are being produced at a higher rate from factories like in Scranton, Pennsylvania, you can have a coordinated policy of pressure on the Russian Federation that I think could make them reconsider whether they should have took the offer Trump put on the table. Essentially, if this goes through, Trump can make the Russians respect American power in Europe, respect American power behind Ukraine, and make them put the dilemma before them on whether or not the Russians are going to choose to drag out this war with more leverage being put behind the Ukrainians, more power being put behind the Ukrainians, more pressure being put on the Russian economy, or take the escape hatch that was offered to him by Donald Trump. Take the 30-day ceasefire and see where you can build from there. And by putting that dilemma clearly to the Russians, instead of Trump allowing his negotiation tooth fairy fantasy to continue to drag out under these conditions, I think that this is something that could really bring some progress. If not progress for where the Ukrainians are on the battlefield, then maybe progress in negotiations. Either way, it would be beneficial for increasing leverage and increasing the cards not only Ukraine has, but that America has for bringing the war to a sooner conclusion. Because the current pathway seems like a pathway that's only going to drag out the war. Now, Donald Trump has responded to this. He has responded to this on Truth Social. He put out a truth, a truth on Truth Social. I still cannot wrap my head around that we're calling them truth posts, truths. I mean, how Orwellian is that? The president has put out a truth. Okay, anyway, let me read it to you guys. This is from a phone call that he had with Vladimir Putin today. I just finished speaking by telephone with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. The call lasted approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. We discussed the attack on Russia's docked airplanes by Ukraine. Now, can I just throw this out there that they were docked as in they were parked on an airfield? Yes, but they were also loaded with missiles. And so when you say docked airplane, I think some people get the image of their head like, oh, those airplanes were just sitting there doing nothing. No, they were getting prepared to attack Ukraine. Okay, this is the philosophy behind why Ben Hodges and many others keep saying, shoot the archer, not the arrow. It's a lot easier to shoot the archer. It's a bigger target, and then it can't fire any more arrows. Right? And if you're not going to provide Ukraine with the air defense systems necessary to defend itself, because the United States, and Amy Marco Rubio is telling the Senate, we don't even have enough Patriot missiles. We don't have. Okay. Well, is Ukraine's option to just sit there and wait for their cities to be bombed, or are they going to do something about it? Well, it looks like they did something about it. We discussed the attack on Russia's docked airplanes by Ukraine and also various other attacks that have been taking place by both sides. Okay. By the way, again, in the immediate aftermath of the attack, they did a missile strike in Sumy city center during rush hour that killed a bunch of civilians. There's no mention of that by Trump. Like that, that just happens. That doesn't deserve the mention. But a bunch of aircraft that was used to bomb Ukrainian cities for over 3 years, that gets the mention. But, it is a historical moment, so how much blame can you give him? It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. Nothing that we have done during this administration has gotten us anywhere closer to even a distant peace. President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on airfields. That was it. That's his response to him saying we got to respond strongly. Very strongly. He does not say that he discouraged him. He does not say that, hey, if you do this, we're going to respond by sending air defense systems. Hey, if you do this, we're going to respond by sending artillery shells. Hey, if you do this, we're going to pass a sanctions bill. Hey, if you do this, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. He just says that Putin said that he's going to react very strongly, and Trump is doing nothing to stop it. At least he's saying he didn't do it. He hasn't said he's done anything. He didn't express, I told him no. Or, imagine if Trump could come out and say, after this attack, I was able to get Putin to not attack Ukraine in response. This shows that they're truly interested in peace. I mean, that would be a real achievement. That'd be a real achievement in negotiations. That'd be a real achievement diplomatically. It'd be something that Donald Trump could put in his achievement wall or whatever, his trophy room. But no, he just says, yep, they're going to respond strongly. And that's it. There's no, don't do it for X, Y, and Z reason. There's no, we will respond this way. We will, unite with Europe to do X, Y. No, nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Not even, we will work with them to intercept whatever missiles you fire. Just an acknowledgement that the Russians will respond very strongly. Now, what ultimately happens here? How much of the blame do we place at Donald Trump? Because the Ukrainians did the military operation. The Russians are saying that they're going to respond. Apparently, the strike in Sumy killing all those civilians was not a strong enough response. How much of it would ultimately be Donald Trump's fault? And usually I wouldn't say the Russians doing something is necessarily Donald Trump's fault, but Donald Trump said that he was going to end the war before he got inaugurated, then 24 hours, then he said 100 days, then he said, oh, I got a civilian ceasefire, that failed, then he said he got an energy ceasefire, that failed, and so then he said, oh, we have to have this 30-day immediate ceasefire or consequences, it failed, and that there was no consequences. And so at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, okay, there seems to be no negative responses for the Russians. Do they just not see this as maybe not direct support or approval from the United States, but a certain tacit acceptance that the Russians are going to do what the Russians are going to do? Moscow, Muscovites, they're going to bomb, and Ukraine's going to get bombed, and that's the state of affairs. Because if the anger is really in any way directed at the Ukrainians for carrying out an operation like this, then what we're saying is that the Ukrainians have to wait for these bombers to never get within range that they can take them out, and they just have to endlessly get by. It's a ridiculous proposal. And so if Trump is going to be the guy who said, I will end the war so quickly, if I was president, I would have ended it, it would have never even started, XYZ, and you can't stop Putin from reacting very strongly through, you know, a tough foreign policy of some sort, of saying you will not do X, Y, and Z, well, then how am I supposed to believe that he could have stopped the war from happening? How am I supposed to believe that any of the things he said he could do, which he failed to do, there was ever a possibility of him achieving? If this is the type of public pressure he's going to put on Putin as he's literally telling Trump what he is going to do, then how are we supposed to expect him to react to any of the other crises he said he could have solved?
Occurred.
Anyway, he then moves on after this complete refusal to tell the Russians, like, no, to have any, I mean, even if he said, hey, you can't, you must abide by the laws of war. If you don't abide by the laws of war, then maybe we'll respond XYZ. Then maybe you won't even stop a Russian response, but maybe you blunt a Russian response. Maybe Putin was thinking of striking like the presidential office and, this building that has a bunch of civilians in it, or that building has civilians in it. Trump says something like that, and he's like, oh, well, I don't want to end negotiations. Maybe instead I'll just strike 3 targets instead of 7, or maybe I'll choose my targets, and I'll make sure that they're military this time, so we don't have all these bodies on TV that are gonna hurt Trump's image or hurt. But no, there's not even an attempt to apply pressure here. At least if there was, he hasn't espoused it publicly. And knowing Trump's mouth, I would have expected that. Anyway, he goes on here. We also discussed Iran and the fact that time is running out on Iran's decision pertaining to nuclear weapons, which must be made quickly. I stated to President Putin that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. See, this was a post about this about these drone attacks, and it's now pivoted to Iran. And notice the difference by which he talks about the Iranians. Iran must make a decision quickly. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and Putin agrees that he cannot have a nuclear weapon. We need to bring this to a rapid conclusion. In my opinion, listen to this last sentence. This is the one that threw me for a loop, and it just shows you how warped Donald Trump's view of this is. It is my opinion that Iran has been slow walking their decision on this very important matter, and we need a definitive answer in a very short period of time. We are 140 days into his 24-hour peace deal. At what point are the Russians slow walking? How long have these secret, Iranian negotiations have been going on? If they've been going on half the time of those 140 days, 80% of the time of those 140 days, how is it that they're slow walking, but we get no comment on the Russians slow walking? We get no reference to the Russians slow walking. We don't say that they're dragging out the process. In fact, Donald Trump continuously kicks the can down the road on their behalf by continuing to say, 2 weeks, 2 weeks pass by, another 2 weeks, 2 weeks pass by, another 2 weeks, 2 weeks pass by, another 2 weeks. And by the end of this week, is he going to say another 2 weeks? Or is he going to implement sanctions policy? Well, I actually don't know. And if sanctions policy is implemented, I don't think it will necessarily be Trump as the one who pulls the trigger. But look at this thing that Donald Trump posted, also on Truth Social. Congress can give Trump the leverage to coerce Putin. And then he posts a link to a WAPO opinion piece. Mind you, right? WAPO is a website that, he's never been completely fond of. I do think that, Congress needs to act kind of in his mind. Maybe, look, it's not my fault. It's that Congress hasn't given me the leverage, XYZ. Trump can institute tariffs immediately because he believes that the executive has that power. You don't even need to go to Congress and say, hey, I want to institute this tariff. But Trump also cannot pull the trigger from his own presidential office on, either tariffs on Russia that he didn't implement while implementing tariffs on Ukraine, or using executive actions to try to pursue more pressure on the Russians, whatever. If this helps Donald Trump act on Ukraine, I'm sure the Ukrainians probably don't care if whether or not it was done through some back padding. Congress can give Trump the leverage to coerce Putin. What's this article he linked to? Well, let's read just a little bit from it. Instead of negotiating with President Donald Trump, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is escalating his attacks against innocent Ukrainian civilians. He's sending rockets into cities and killing people. Trump said this week, "I don't like it at all." It's clear that Putin does not want peace. He has been forced to end the war. He has to be forced to end the war. To do that, Trump needs greater leverage. Congress can give it to him by passing the Sanctioning Russia Act, a bipartisan effort led by Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, and Tom Cotton, a Republican from Arkansas. The bill, which has a whopping 82 co-sponsors in the Senate, which is a lot, would impose bone-crushing sanctions, which is also veto-proof, by the way, if all of those people ended up voting for it, would impose bone-crushing sanctions on Russia. Right now, Russia is suffering from double-digit inflation, skyrocketing interest rates, and catastrophic labor shortages. The only thing the country's economy is in the economy keeping it from collapse is revenue from oil and gas exports. This legislation would shut off the most important source of cash for the Kremlin by barring energy transactions with sanctioned Russian banks and imposing a 500% secondary tariff. 500% is, imagine about as high as you can go on any country, not company, country. Meaning that this wouldn't be like, oh, this company can take the hit because they don't do business in America, but this company can't. No, it'd be the country. And imposing a 500% secondary tariff on any country that purchases Russian origin uranium, oil, natural gas, petroleum, or petroleum products and petrochemical products, which is largely what funds the war and has helped keep the Russian government economy afloat with like 30 to 35% of revenues coming from these products. This would give Trump the power to effectively drive Russian energy sales from the global market, which would crush the Russian economy and deny Putin the funds to continue his aggression against Ukraine. Most important, it would provide Trump with strong bipartisan backing as he tries one last time to persuade Putin to stop his massacres of Ukrainian civilians and negotiate a permanent end to this brutal, senseless war. And then it goes on to say that signing the bill does not mean Trump has to implement the sanctions immediately, even though if he signs the bill and then does not implement it, the Russians might then look at it like, oh, they're calling our bluff again. He doesn't actually want to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the first time Trump is republishing articles about this, saying, maybe we should engage in these secondary sanctions. This is him talking about it seriously again for the first time in a bit. And this is at the same time that there is momentum in Congress with 82 co-sponsors in the Senate in order to pass large sanction bills against the Russians to add pressure to them. We're still not talking about a new AIDS package. There has still been no dialogue, no back and forth between the Congress and the presidency or any chamber about, we need to actually send a new AIDS package. We actually need to approve X, Y, or Z weapon sale. That hasn't happened. We're not seeing that. But Donald Trump, a lot more favorable of leaning on those economic responses, is looking at sanctions. I would say that Trump did approve $142 billion weapons deals with the Saudis. So I don't think a $20 billion weapons deal with the Ukrainians is impossible to ask for, but this is the best we're hearing right now. So look, I am not saying that Donald Trump is going to immediately implement these sanctions. As the article describes, Trump could have Congress pass the sanctions, sign it, and then not pull the trigger on it, hold it back as he continues to negotiate with the Russians. And hell, maybe he could even try to be like, well, you know what, actually, I want to not do this, try to go back to Congress or, veto it, send it back to Congress, and then pressure Congress people to, pass it again. But this right here shows Trump, as the momentum is building, posting articles that are sympathetic to these, not even sympathetic, openly advocating for much tougher sanctions on the Russians that would have the strongest sanctions placed on them for the entirety of the war. And if that happens, the Russian economy is going to be in an extremely difficult position as they find a way to finance this war, which they already can't do endlessly now, but will be even harder, and the economic crisis will come on sooner if these secondary sanctions go into effect and the Chinese and the Indians respond accordingly by backing off on the Russian energy imports. It would also test the Chinese to see how interested they actually are in having the Russians drag their war to a conclusion much sooner. Here is what Zelenskyy has to say about the large amount of air attacks on the country and the response to everything that's going on right now. Facts are stubborn things. Since the beginning of this year, the Russian army has carried out attacks against Ukraine using nearly 27,700 aerial bombs, almost 11,200 Shahed drones, and around 9,000 other types of attack UAV, and more than 700 missiles, including ballistic ones, and that's in less than half a year. This is the pace of Russian strikes, and they deliberately set this tempo from the very first days of the full-scale war. Russia has resurrected its entire state, restructured its entire state, society, and economy to be able to kill people in other countries on a mass scale and with impunity. Many have spoken with Russia at various levels, but none of these talks have brought a reliable peace, or even stopped the war. Unfortunately, Putin feels impunity. Even after all of Russia's horrific attacks, he is reportedly preparing yet more so-called responses. It means that with every new strike, with every new delay of diplomacy, Russia is giving the finger to the entire world. Damn, never heard it put that way before. To all those who will still hesitate to increase pressure on it. Yet it is Russia that should be seeking peace. It is Moscow that must begin to feel that the war carries a cost, a high cost, and the highest one should be paid by the aggressor. If the world reacts weakly to Putin's threats, he interprets it as a readiness to turn a blind eye to his actions. When he does not feel strength and pressure, but instead weakness, he always commits new crimes. He sees such an attitude as silent permission for new atrocities, new strikes, new killings. This is why we in Ukraine are so grateful to everyone in the world who is trying to stop this war and stop Russian attacks. To everyone who tells the killer that he will be held accountable. To everyone who says Russian missiles and bombs must stop taking innocent lives. Russia must bring back peace. And today, on the day of remembrance of Ukrainian children killed by Russian aggression, we remind the powerful of this world of the facts. If the powerful do not stop Putin, it means they share responsibility with him. And if they want to stop him but cannot, then Putin will no longer see them as powerful. Damn. Also, there is one last thing I have to drop here. I thought this question asked by a reporter to Press Secretary Caroline Levitt of the Trump's People's Republic was very fascinating because he just throws it at her, just blunt, and I appreciate it. When that Oval Office meeting happened, where Trump and J.D. Vance turned into a tag team wrestling duo and started like dropping like, Midnight Express type leg drops on him. As that was happening, Zelenskyy, according to the reports that have been published, knew that this attack, Operation Spiderweb, was being prepared. And so as Donald Trump was saying that Zelenskyy has no cards, as J.D. Vance was repeating the idea that they have no leverage, no ability to resist, they have nothing to bring pressure upon the Russians, Zelenskyy knew that this attack was being prepared. In fact, this attack was being prepared with his explicit permission, meaning that as he was sitting there and listening to them going off, somewhere in the back of his brain, whether it was in the frontal lobe or wherever it ended up resting in the different curves and bumps of his cortexes, of his brain, he knew that this was happening. And so this journalist puts it, I think, in a very interesting way. Listen to this.
And answer that question.
And on Caroline, one more on Ukraine,
ahead,
please.
Sure, go ahead.
On Ukraine, it's been a couple of days since Ukraine made that audacious drone strike on Russian airfields. The president hasn't said a word about it, and usually he's not shy about making his thoughts known
Don't you
on
love that?
the war, or it's not bad, on the war or any other subject. What have you heard from him on this audacious drone strike? Is he surprised? He said that Zelenskyy didn't have the cards when they met in the Oval Office a few months back. Does Zelenskyy possibly have some cards that the president hadn't known about?
Look, the president's thinking on the Russia-Ukraine war as it stands, I spoke to him about it just this morning, is he remains positive at the progress that we've seen. Again, he urged both leaders to sit down and talk directly with one another, and they did that. Russia handed over a memorandum of peace, or a peace plan, or a suggestion of one, I understand, to the Ukrainian side.
What she's talking about, I swear to God, is Russia responded to Trump's
Burns is an
demand.
immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Russia responded. Thank you so much for the sub. I appreciate that. Thank you for the primer, Wrath. I appreciate that. Russia responded to Trump's demand that they have an immediate, unconditional 30-day ceasefire by saying, with threat of sanctions, by saying, well, how about instead, we send the Ukrainians a memorandum of understanding to negotiate a ceasefire, which then could lead to an eventual peace deal. Meaning that they sent the Ukrainians a memorandum on negotiating, not negotiating. They didn't start negotiating. They sent them a memorandum on starting the negotiation that could lead to a ceasefire. And then they take it as a W. Great. And by the way, all of the memorandums of understanding I have seen that they say, oh, look, we're closer to a peace deal. It still includes Ukrainian demilitarization. It still includes the Ukrainians recognizing Russian as an official state language. It still demands the Ukrainians withdraw from Kherson. It still demands the Ukrainians withdraw from Zaporizhia, in a city of 700,000 people, that they withdraw from Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, the last little bits of the Luhansk Oblast that are not occupied, and not only withdraw from these, as Trump suggested that the line could be frozen where it is. No. That's more than that. Withdrawing from territory that they currently don't control, including giving them a Kherson River crossing across the Dnieper. That would mean the most defensible natural barrier of Ukraine would be avoided by the Russians, not only withdrawing, but officially recognizing it as Russian clay, meaning that they wouldn't only just have to withdraw from these cities that they defended with blood and iron, but they would then have to say, they're Russian cities. Also, we recognize the Russian language. Also, here's all of our tanks, artillery, guns, soldiers. It was what you would call a maximalist position that would be considered by just about every Ukrainian as a non-starter. The polling data that I see shows that Ukrainians want to negotiate an end to this war. Okay, they want to see an end to this war, and they're willing to engage in some compromise to do it. But the compromise that if you break down that data from Gallup or Pew Research, what you find is they're talking about whether or not they could accept, like, could we accept Crimea being part of Russia, or at least accepting that they're going to control it for the foreseeable future, XYZ. That's the stuff they're negotiating. They're not saying, let's give up all our guns. Let's give them even more land that they failed to conquer, that they, or in Kherson case, territory that the Ukrainians fought and lost men to liberate. Or territory, in Kharkiv that they did the same thing. It just, and this is as the Russians are advancing, trying to advance into Sumy and Kharkiv again. It's a non-starter. So is putting forward a list of demands that are less unreasonable than a sticker price at a used car dealership, is that really a step towards peace that we want to brag about?
To sit down and talk directly with one another, and they did that. Russia handed over.
By the way, Putin, again, as we said earlier, he said he doesn't want to negotiate with Zelenskyy, it would be negotiating with terrorists.
Leaders to sit down and talk directly with one another, and they did that. Russia handed over a memorandum of peace, or a peace plan, or a suggestion of one, I understand, to the Ukrainians.
Listen to that. They offered a memorandum of peace, or a peace plan, or a piece of paper that had to do with a peace plan. She doesn't even know what it is.
side. They also agreed upon the exchange of prisoners.
Even she's getting confused by the Russian bureaucratic language. I'm sorry. Okay, we'll move on.
And they did that. Russia handed over a memorandum of peace, or a peace plan, or a suggestion of one, I understand, to the Ukrainian side. They also agreed upon the exchange of prisoners or hostages from each other's countries. So he remains positive about the progress that we're seeing, but he also is a realist, and he realizes these are two countries that are at war and have been for a long time because of his predecessor's weakness and incompetence. So he's working hard to solve this conflict, and that's where his mind is right now on it. John.
The only benefit we've had from recent negotiations is the large-scale prisoner exchanges. That's not to say that large-scale prisoner exchanges haven't happened before, but the 1,000 to recently negotiated 1,200 prisoner exchanges, those are the largest of the war.
Russia's minimum demand to even start negotiations for peace is Ukrainian capitulation, and somehow the right doesn't understand why Ukraine doesn't immediately accept it. Just insane.
These are people that would never accept the standard for their own country. Tim Pool wouldn't accept the standard. Scott Pressler wouldn't accept the standard. Those guys from the PPD podcast wouldn't accept the standard. None of these people would accept the standard from their own countries. But they do want to apply the standard to Ukraine. And I'll tell you exactly why they're confused. They're confused because what they've been told and they've been telling their audiences is that Ukraine is a proxy state, is that we control it. It's a puppet of George Soros. It's a puppet of the deep state. It's a puppet of this, a puppet of that.
Burns
and so
is
what they
immoral,
expected,
morally corrupt,
bankrupt man, Horserface. Thank you so much for the primer. So what they expected was that they were going to walk in there and Trump was going to say, Ukraine, do this. And then peace was going to, but both they bought Trump's bullshit on ending the war quickly. And they expected that Ukraine would just kind of do whatever we tell them to. Now, first off, they were naive to believe Trump's nonsense. And so now they have to explain it to themselves. Someone has to be at fault for Trump's ridiculous promises of ending the war immediately failing. And well, Ukraine was the country that was kind of constantly being bashed anyway on the campaign trail. So that's an easy target. So I think, but the other part of it is I think they're angry that the proxy state Ukraine is less of a proxy state than they originally thought. And so after being told time and time again that Ukraine is just a Western puppet, and now they see Ukraine is pursuing its own interests, but using Western aid and Western alliances to try to ensure its own survival, and they're standing up strong for what they, believe in these meetings with Trump and stuff, they're getting frustrated. They're getting frustrated as a bunch of supposed nationalists who believe in national sovereignty at Ukraine asserting its national sovereignty. Maybe they just shouldn't be such globalists. I don't know. Let's convince Trump to build Trump Towers on Mars, and he can personally oversee its construction, and we get Musk to cut. No, let's just get Trump Tower in Kiev, and then he'll send all the Patriot air defense systems to protect it. Ay, ay, ay.